Hello, everyone. My name is Tommy Tso. Thank you for the invitation. And before I introduce today's theme and discussion, I'd like to introduce myself. And I'd like you to introduce yourselves too. So in the chat, right, in the Zoom chat, if you can write what is something that you're interested in design, write something that you're interested in design, and write something you're interested outside of design. Right? So two things: what are you interested in design, and what are you interested outside of design? And I also encourage you to turn on your camera so that we can engage. Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself now. My name is Tommy Tso. I am an OAA architect. I have about 12 years of professional experience. And in 2011, I graduated from TMU. With a Bachelor of Architectural Science, that's where I learned building science, project management, and design. And then after I graduated, I worked in CSMP, a few years doing community centers, schools, and civic centers. Then I went back to school in U of T to study my Master of Architecture. At the same time, I worked quite a bit. I worked on some small houses on the side. I also taught. I specialized in parametric design. I still do. I learned a whole lot of softwares, and I continue to teach in various places. One of those places are my own practice called School of Ideas, which is a lot of DNA of what I do there resides in the talk I have today. And then I also teach at OCAD. I've been teaching third-year studio and first-year studio. This is my line of work. I'm an architect working in HOK Toronto. It's a global practice, integrated disciplinary practice that contains architecture, interior design, landscape, and urban design. I've worked on complex projects like airports, healthcare facilities, and this project in front of you, Center Block, which is our Parliament building. I've been on this project for 6 years. If you've ever been to Ottawa, that giant hole, probably the biggest hole in Canada right now, that's us doing our work. It's going to be a very exciting piece of iconic Canadian landmark, but also representative of democracy, which kind of links to our theme. Right. Outside of Center Block, I love to cook, I love music, and I love basketball. So if you want to talk about any of those things, I am your guy. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so today our theme is advocacy and activism. And our agenda today, there will be two halves. The first half, we are going to be looking at a slideshow. And is meant to provoke some of your thoughts. We will go through some brief history, and then we're going to go look at the function of those spaces, and then what those future, right? So what have we done in the past? What are we doing now? And where are we going in the future? And in the second half, we're going to have a town hall. I'm going to present some objective truth, right? Some of these topics can be heavy, and it can touch parts of the truth that can have a deeper meaning for you, right? And if this is not your truth, right, I welcome your perspective at the town hall, right? There is a QR code you can see in the bottom right corner. It's a link. It's a link to an online forum on Google Jamboard for your discussions and questions. Cynthia can also help me out and paste the link to that in the chat. And you can type any questions or observations there. You can also type any questions or observations in the Zoom chat. And those questions are listed at the top. I have 3 questions there. What design examples have enabled advocacy and activism? And how can design better enable advocacy and activism? Okay, there's one more bonus question in question 3. Right, you can use any of the boards to kind of paste in your text answer or picture answer. Okay, so let's begin with this topic. All right, so this topic, of course, it has some relevance to the stuff I do at Parliament of Canada, but I'm also a citizen. Right? I'm also an advocate for democracy, and I'm also a maker of space. Right, so it really brings a certain realness and weight to our work. Right? Your work in a built environment matters. Right? If anything you want to take away today, that's the one I want you to take away. Right? Your work can give or take away voice. Right? And this topic, as I said, it's advanced and it's heavy, but I believe there's enough young minds here that is optimistic to change and technologies, and hopefully we can push some of these topics. In front of you is a painting by the artist Raphael. It's called A School, Athens. And I believe the thing that separates us as human beings different from any species is that we can learn objectively, right? Not just from each other, but across time and place. Right? And at the center of the painting is Plato and Aristotle with opposing school of thoughts. They're debating. They, along with everyone in a crowd, is trying to understand the world around them collectively. And also, you notice there's a place. Raphael calls it a school. It's a fictitious place, but it represents a vessel for sharing ideas. It's a built environment for conversation, and symbiotically, the culture of conversation creates places like these. So therein lies two ingredients, right? There's a culture to speak and act, and a built environment that encourages it, and they're symbiotic. Advocacy is defined as giving support to an idea, a course of action, or a belief. And activism means working to achieve political or social change. Right? The emphasis are highlighted in yellow. It's the public sharing of ideas and belief that causes action and change. And this very grassroots level of voice and action can trace back to the founding place of democracy. Here in the background, you'll find the ancient Acropolis to the bottom right. So let's take a short trip through history, beginning with ancient Athens. In the days of ancient Greece, Athenians doesn't only hold the right to speak, but it's an obligation. The adult male of the household, which is another problem, we'll circle back, would come to this place, right, together every morning. This place is called ecclesia. Ecclesia is an assembly of citizens. It takes place at the agora, the civic and the commercial heart of the city, where people will come and discuss all kinds of topics: business, politics, current events, the nature of the universe, and the divine. And on the bottom right, you'll see a faithful reconstruction of a very similar place. Sometime later in the 5th century, this meeting place was moved from the agora to a hill southwest of the Acropolis called a Panax. The word Panax means tightly packed. It's where 5,000 Athenians would gather on the site you see on the right. Right? Everyone would sit along the benches facing an elevated platform, and a presiding officer would invite people to address the assembly one by one. People would speak and motion, and then the assembly would vote on these motions. So the agora, the Panax, and later in people's own homes, right, Athenians has both the culture and the built environment to support the sharing of ideas. This built environment is also manifested in other scales. As I will go through in this presentation, you will see things like this. This is called the declaratorian. It's a randomization device allotting citizens to various civic duties, like jury duties, city councilors, and other state offices. Right? People are anonymously represented as ballots. We see the evolution of these places carried forward in the Roman Republic. In the Republic, instead of every citizens for themselves, which can be inefficient in a larger city, people elect representations, right, which forms a democratic government. And as a result, there's a place of government called a Campidolia. It's called a Capline Hill, right? So you'll see it on your top left. The civic square, which represent the power vested with the people to speak and openly critique such government, sits outside of the Campidoglio at the Roman Forum on the bottom of the image. It's a form of government where the power is still held by the people, right? Not an emperor, king, or queen, or a military ruler. And this power is represented in a place where you can openly critique such government. Right? So in a place like the Roman Forum, this is the next evolution of contemporary Greek agora and pnyx. Later in the Middle Ages, there was a legend. Right? King Arthur and his knights sat around a round table with no head, implying that everyone sits there, has equal status and equal right to advise the king. While this is a legend, right, the symbolism of the round table developed as a story because it actually embodied the cultural ideal of the time. At that time, chivalry is the code of conduct for knights, which included high morals, warrior ethos, knightly piety, and courtly manners, right? Establishing this notion of honor and nobility. And people are valued for their ethics and conducts, not just their status or background. And this physical object, the round table, was a vessel of that idea. Then in the medieval England, the Magna Carta gave rise to Parliament for the purpose of helping the monarchy in executing government. The word Parliament is derived from the French word parler, which means to speak, to advise the king. It takes place in a chamber where opposition would face each other. Right? There's a speaker of the house to moderate the debate and a public gallery public gallery for oversight and accountability. This is the next evolution of the ancient agora and pnyx. So pictured here is the House of Lords chamber at the British Parliament, where you can see the monarchy in the center, the Parliament executing the work on two oppositions, and the public surrounding this group, keeping a close eye from the gallery. Now, this oversight can be expressed at the architectural scale. Right? The podium level of the Toronto City Hall, right? The public can freely walk up, peek into the chamber, and walk into the gallery, participating in the democratic process. More famously, the addition of the Reichstag hold a very similar idea. Right? It's a statement for a government who wishes to be more transparent so that it doesn't repeat its darker past. The public occupies the high dome at the place of government, overseeing the chamber below, symbolically and literally keeping a close eye on the democratic process. When we can't do these things, when we close off the spaces to see in, to participate, it doesn't stop our desire to speak or act. And so seen here in 2019, the pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong, the government closed off their civic square. So the people took to the street to protest. This is the first and most prominent Lenin Wall in Hong Kong, where people would write their thoughts and opinions on Post-it notes, informing the world and each other we will continue to voice and make change. Right here, the space isn't designed. It is readapted to make our own. We'll continue to make other places like our agora and pnyx. Right? If we don't have a space, we will make new spaces out of the unexpected. Here, local artists and city staff painted Black Lives Matter on 16th Street in close proximity to the White House. I should reiterate, my theme here is not politically centric. Right? Here is a space given to the public, and citizens turn it into giant yoga mat, right, for everyone. Right? In this instance, advocacy and activism is a physical expression, right? Not just vocal or visual. You can find numerous examples of these organically adaptive spaces everywhere. When I visited Barcelona in 2019, I saw skateboarders transform the terraces and benches outside Macba right, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Barcelona, into their own playground. You might have heard of parkour. That's another example. Right? The lesson here is if we're given the space, we will use the space, whether or not it was designed for it. But as designers, I think we can do more than just providing a blank slate and expect people to do as they please. Now, there's a modernist principle called tower in a park. Right? Specifically, the park idea has failed us more times than not, because these very large spaces that we intended to be just a park are not very interesting. Right? And sometimes they're out of scale to the things we want to do. So what do? Well, first, we should design for everyone. This is metaphorically our contemporary King Arthur's round table, where our design should offer inclusivity and accessibility for all that comes to ecclesia, right? The assembly of citizens, not just the male, right? Everyone, right? It's designing for all mobility, all gender, all age, all height. If there's one takeaway today, it is this, right? A well-designed space should make everyone feel like it's their own, right? Make a space for everyone and advocate for those that are in need or doesn't have a voice. And after we provide inclusive design, we should give it some flavor. There's this concept in design called designing for the flaneur. The flaneur are wanderers. They're people who are indirectly and usually unintentionally affected by a particular design in passing by. In Paris, the movable green chairs is an excellent example of this. In many of their public gardens, the movable chairs allow people to have agency in their own space. People can make their own groupings. They can form spontaneous activities. You might have also seen these around in Toronto and other places. These are simultaneously the smallest and largest libraries in our cities. The Little Free Library promotes neighborhood book exchanges in a design vessel of a bookcase, right? Each one with its own personality. This one here has children that appears like they're doing labor, right? It is not. It is a playground, right? But not one we're too familiar with anymore. If you look closely, kids are playing with fire, nail, and saws. It's not the type of playground we're familiar with today because we designers have lost the sense of humility and trust towards our patrons. Right, the story here was architect Carl Theodor Sorensen in the mid-1940s noticed kids played in everything but design playgrounds. Right, they played with discarded materials and tools, using them to dig, build, and invent their own forms of play. So in a Copenhagen neighborhood, Sorensen created the first junkyard playground, where kids are allowed to partake in controlled risk and free play. They're allowed to discover their own, make their own, and negotiate their spaces and play with other kids around them. And it turns out, when you entrust kids with objects that have purposes and consequences, they learn to manage risk better. It is more thrilling, and they actually get injured less because they don't have to invent thrill in an otherwise safe but boring playground. And kids shown here have agency in their own play. And junkyard playground, later known as adventure playground, went all around the world, even in Toronto. So you can see the image of a CN Tower in the background. Here's something in the architectural scale. In Chile and Mexico, low-income families can't afford a good house. So the architect had an idea. They're balancing the cost of site and construction. Architect Alejandro Aravena designed half a good house rather than a finished small house. This allowed its occupants a framework to incrementally grow their own homes and at their own pace, right, according to their own flavor, needs, and financial capacity. And spaces doesn't have to be limited to physical space. Right? With the growth of another space, the digital environment, the designer have to consider an infinitely accessible and infinitely malleable form of interface with the physical environment. These technologies can help anyone navigate a space that's much larger than they can see, right, in real time, making us feel like we're all together as one advocate when we're really physically far apart. This is an app in front of you, right? This is an app coordinating a whole city of protesters in Hong Kong with off-grid messaging and real-time protest movement. The question is, how do we design, right, smart spaces for people to excel in this form of connection, advocacy, and activism? And there's a lot to talk about in digital twin spaces and metaverse because our culture is shifting. First with the available technology, and then there was the necessity of a global pandemic. Our physical environments are interlacing with digital infrastructure, whether it's a phone, a tablet, or computer, or even a watch. We can find portals for us to come together, share ideas, and make actions. And this remote culture is giving rise to new category of spaces we haven't fully mastered. But WeWork certainly pioneered an environment for digital-based offices, but is it the metaverse that's next? Is it hybrid learning and meeting? What do you think is the next school of Athens? So in conclusion, right, fundamentally, it is still this. There's a culture to speak and act in a built-in environment that encourages it, and they're symbiotic. And this topic relates to us because we're advocates of democracy and maker of space. And it brings realness and weight to our work. Right? So your work in the environment really matters, right? It gives and take away voice. That's all I have for today in terms of the provocation. As I said before, I want to remind you there is a Google Jamboard that you can paste your own questions. I can browse that in a moment to see what have you observed or any kind of comments you have. You can also use the chat. And we'll spend the next little bit as an open forum to kind of openly discuss the 3 questions I have there. Right? What design examples can you think of have enabled advocacy and activism? Second question is, how can design better enable advocacy and activism? And there's a bonus question, the third question. What are our new civic centers? Right? Where do you go to make voice and actions? Any questions? Any brave soul want to ask any questions out loud? I can also browse through our Jamboard to see if you have collected any observations or comments.
Yeah, so I'll just share the Google Jamboard link again, just in case for anyone who came in a little later. Now feel free, like Tommy said, to express your answers, or if you have any questions, type them on a sticky note, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4th icon down on the left side. There are some answers to the questions already.
Yeah, I can see some answers. Some people answer where our civic centers are. Somebody wrote Reddit, Twitter. Right? Those are, I think, very much in the news, right? What does it mean to have one of those spaces encourage free speech? And what kind of, I think I want to focus more on not necessarily what is free speech, but like what kind of design did you see on forums like Reddit and Twitter that enables free speech or enables advocacy and activism? Question 1, what design examples have enabled advocacy and activism? Public open spaces. Is there any examples of public open spaces that you can think of? I think on Jamboard, you are able to also paste in images. So feel free to browse through Google Images, right, on spaces that you have visited in the city. If there's an example on parks. I agree, right? That's anybody can use an open space like a park. Yeah, I'd like to zone in a little bit more. Like, so for example, a park, right? What design elements within a park enables advocacy and activism? I have some summaries on the side here. The toolbar seems to be covering this. What can I? Okay, so these are some of the summaries that I've pasted from my slideshow. Right. How are some of those spaces achieving these things, right? To give people a sense of belonging, allowing people to shape their own, give their own, discover their own, grow their own. Oh, that's a great image, right? To be able to use your streets as really a long a path of making your voices heard, right? Often people march down streets, right? They don't just stay in one area; they go through streets. Also encourage you to speak. If you want to unmute yourself, you are free to do that.
For some reason, I can't post a picture. I think I'm doing it wrong, so I'm just gonna say it.
Sure.
I think that courtyards, like, or squares more so, at least in Europe, provided a really good space for activism because it allowed for a lot of people to gather who had the same sort of thought where they could speak openly.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I think particularly to courtyards, that's also a very interesting type of space to speak. Is it's a little bit between a public and a private space. It blurs the line a little bit. It's a group of neighbors that share something. Right?
Mhm.
There's a sense of safety, and I think that's a design element. Right? That's by design. Right? The fact that it's quartered off, right, limiting some access to only people living in that neighborhood, is a form of design that allows for that advocacy and activism to happen. You feel safe. Okay, so let's focus on that a little bit. Let's see if we can all take a couple minutes and see if we can find good examples of courtyards. Let me remind you, there's also more than one boards. Right? There's additional boards in the second and third page here. So if we would just go to the second board, I would ask us to just do a quick Google image search, right, to find courtyards that you think is encouraging for people to act and speak. You can also find examples of design that doesn't enable that, and we can also talk about it.
I actually just added in the first board in the bottom corner. Yeah, I thought that like at least in the last, I don't know, five-ish years, I think people have gravitated more and more towards like memes or like pop culture references to communicate their ideas, because that's something that people understand quickly, and and it's flexible. You can adapt different formats of memes to communicate. And yeah, I think, I don't know if it's like purely design, but it's a way that um, people communicate.
Yeah, I think it's 100% design. Okay, so let me open that up a little bit more. I just Googled memes. Okay, so you can find courtyards and you can find memes. Let's take a moment to find a meme that that you think is great. Okay, and then we can talk about that. I know it sounds like it's not about making space, but it is, right? It is a form, I believe so. So let's see if we can go and find a meme that you like or it's funny. Right, let's post it into the Jamboard and let's talk about what are some ingredients to a good meme. I can use a good meme tonight. I also got some really fantastic images of courtyards and plazas. Fantastic. Okay, let's find a few more. I'll give us a few more minutes and then we can talk about it. I said, if you want to unmute yourself, you want to make a comment, you have a question, please feel open and safe to do so. Hey, great post. Keep it up, keep going. Let's have another minute at this, and then we can take a look what we got. Hey, another 10 seconds. Let's squeeze your last memes in and courtyards. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for also organizing some of this this content on left and right side. So that's it'll be great to see. Okay, so let's talk about memes first. I think that's quite fun. What makes a good meme? Some of us have posted
something something relevant.
Something relevant.
Yeah,
Okay.
something relevant delivered in some kind of funny way.
There is a sense of humor, right? There's something that that we can all relate to. What else is an essential ingredient to a good meme? So we have some here.
Also something that most people will relate to and understand.
That's right. That's right. Something you recognize right away, right, so that there's not a whole lot of explaining to do. Okay, good. Great point. Anything else?
Repeatability, so like you can just change the images but they have the same context.
Okay. Right, so there's some variability. You can also substitute things. What else? What about the format? Right, how does it look? How is it composed?
I guess it's like levels of memes and generational memes, I guess. Like with the one on the right where it tells joke in graduation speech, no one laughs. That's very, I want to say 2000, 2010, 2012, but now it's just turned into memes like the center one where it's British Columbia looking back at proportional representation. So the memes have definitely become more political and just more straightforward as well.
I hear you. I hear you. Okay, so I pasted that one. I hope you guys laughed then.
I would also say that our like technology. So like smartphones and like all the apps that we use, whether like in like way before it'd be like when I was in high school, it would be MSN, but then when now it's Discord, TikTok, and Be Real and
Right.
other apps. But all of like these different apps still allow you to send like simple images. Like all these memes are not like complicated images; they're quite easy to send. And it's like pretty casual. It doesn't feel like you're giving people like a lecture. So it's like like to the point.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I think that's a fantastic point, right? So we've heard things like relevancy, we've heard things like the simplicity, right? Ryan, you also mentioned really the kind of backbone, right, to why there's a rise to memes because of how short form it is, how quick this can get delivered in all sorts of flexible form. If you look at the composition of a meme, it's quite easy to get. There's one image, right, or a series of simple images with a simple line of text, right, that you can get right away, right, that you can get within, I would say, 5 seconds, right? If it takes much longer than that, right, that's not the majority purpose of the meme, right? It's supposed to be quick. It's supposed to deliver in all sorts of forms fairly simply. And I think there's something to learn about this and also making an environment that encourages activism and advocacy. I think we can carry similar ideas of being clear with our design, being simple, and always setting up a composition that people can recognize, that people are have a sort of it's intuitive design. Right? You can approach it, you understand it, you can use it. Right. So I think this is a great, I think a lesson, right, for us designers to think in anything we do. Right? How do we make it accessible? Right, simple, right, clear, and easily substituted with different parts, but always readable, always legible. Any other thoughts on memes before we talk a little bit about courtyards?
I think one more thing about memes is that there are layers to it. So it can literally be 2 or 3 memes into one, and you just need to understand the first one before you're able to understand the third one.
There's a progression, right? I absolutely think that's right, and we see this now in short form videos. Right now it's, we don't need a series of images like comic books. We just need a short form video to tell a much greater story than even one image can do. Right. So if we approach making spaces with that kind of like clever simplicity, right, to be able to tell a story through a sequence of spaces or sequence of movements through a space, there's something to learn from memes. Okay, let's talk a little bit about courtyards, and if you still have lingering thoughts on memes, please feel free to chime in. Okay, so we have a couple of courtyards and some also hinging on outdoor spaces and plazas. What are some design elements there that enable advocacy and activism?
Before like you go into courtyards, this is what, so the McDonald's image, that should not be a courtyard. That's like complete opposite of a courtyard, what should be. Complete, like all opposite.
How so? How is it opposite and different?
Lack of open spaces. It's all commercialized.
Mhm.
and it's high traffic, so like not a lot of people would see it.
Right. And from the little I can see in this image, right, I can tell this is designed for a very specific culture, a car culture. Right. And it's not inclusive for everyone who visit this space. I would agree. Any other thoughts on the images you see in front of you relating to courtyards?
So the one behind the McDonald's, I put it was actually the square and brush off,
Hmm.
and it's I guess a giant courtyard, but there are just areas for people to sit, and like Devish mentioned, the opposite of the McDonald's pictures that there's a lot of open space to congregate in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. What else do you see in this space? Right, you mentioned there's seating areas. What kind of other design elements do you see in this plaza?
I would say the fountain is a pretty attractive feature to get people to even come to the square.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a point of interest, a defining feature.
And very accessible. No cars in sight. Yeah, no
Mhm.
cars.
A courtyard could also be like a mall. So the image near the London one, that's like an urban open mall, which like is so it like replaces like a town hall in a city which never had a town hall, because town halls are common in older cities to like a place of gathering, but new cities don't have that. So it could like so it's a replacement of town halls.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. I'm gonna just zoom in. What design elements do you see in this mall that encourages people to act and speak as they choose? What makes a space comfortable for all those things to happen?
It needs to feel inviting. So the space is pretty big, even though it's inside.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, that's right. Right. So there's space for people to move into different comfort zones. Right. We talked about social distancing. That actually comes from an urban design book. I actually have it right in front of me. It's called Pedestrian Planning and Design. It's by this guy called Fruin, John Fruin. And in the beginning, I know we kind of question a whole lot. Why is it called social distancing? Because it's a term he actually termed. It means a person within 6 feet is now within your social distance. Right. So in this image here, there are different types of spaces that encourages different distance for people to be in. Right. If you're sitting down, you now encroach within that social distance. But there's also the kind of corridor spaces, circulation spaces that allows people to move in farther apart distances. Right, having enough space, giving people flexibility to choose their own distances matters in the space. Okay. What else in this image of a mall that is inviting? I think that was one term that was used earlier. What makes it inviting?
I actually found this picture because I was looking for a picture of a food court. Um, I think food courts, like in malls particularly, are inviting because even though most people go there and they buy something to eat from one of the vendors and they sit down, you don't actually have to. And so like you see a lot of like older folks or like teenager students, they just hang out there, right? And it's like a place for people to just chat and kill time.
Mhm.
And so it's a good kind of like free space as opposed to like going to a Starbucks where
Mm.
it's kind of implied that in order for you to sit down, you have to pay for at least a drink.
Mm. Yes, and I think you imply a few other things there. I think a space is inviting for choice when there are choices to be made. You can go there to eat. You can go there to be entertained. You can go there to speak loudly in an open space or be in a corner by yourself. And when you invite choices, you also invite people in. And it's actually funny. I think I recognize the space, and I think I was right. Um, this is the BCE place, the food court in BC. I recognize the staircase. Um, it's funny you chose this image because the space above this food court is actually also a fantastic courtyard-like space. One of the best. And I will add to why I think this is a great space is because of natural light. Right? It's not just here's all the natural light in the world. It's tempered. It's carefully tempered so it's not glaring. Right? It feels like you're walking underneath an artificial set of trees. Okay. All right, we are coming in at 9 o'clock, and I know this is near the end. But any kind of thoughts, any remaining thoughts? I know we didn't touch on every images here. If you have any other thoughts, we can close with that.
Feel free to also type in chat if you have any thoughts. If not, I would like to say thank you for everyone for joining us for our last webinar of the year. And thank you, Tommy, for being such a great guest speaker and just teaching us a bit more about how advocacy and activism plays a role online and offline, and just how important it is to actually provide space for people to speak freely and to congregate and just enjoy their surroundings.
Thank you for having me. I hope you had as much fun as I had.
It took a different turn with the memes, but it was interesting,
It was a
definitely.
good turn. It was a good turn on a Wednesday night.
Yeah, so everyone
A
have
question.
Oh,
I
yeah.
had a question. So if you go to this, the third slide on the Jamboard, if you had
Third slide. There we go.
yeah. So as you are an architect, what do you think about like these kind of buildings? So this is a commie block, as people call it.
Mhm. Is there a specific question about which part do I think about it?
So these are not like artistically pleasing or any inviting. So how like people actually, so why are these things here? That's like a fact. That could be a question.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. There is a time and place for how things get made, and there's also a context. So not understanding where exactly this is, I don't want to speculate a whole lot, but I can count
Kiev,
Kiev.
Yep.
In Ukraine.
In Ukraine.
Okay. Okay, so housing blocks. Housing is a very interesting topic, which I think we all do have a vested interest in it. And it's usually made by many forces beyond just the how does it belong in the public realm? It's made by very clear financial forces, very clear political forces, in policies like building codes and zoning has a lot to do with it. Okay, so this is my speculation, not knowing a whole lot about this particular block here. My speculation is there's a housing policy that wants a certain amount being made. And if this is, let's say, publicly funded, there is also a certain amount of budget, right, for it to be as good as it can, as efficient as it can, to deliver as many housing as it can. It's not a perfect design, but there are some things to like about it, right? This comes from, I think I see a lot of the tower in a park idea here, where they try to condense all the units into a tower so that they can alleviate the ground plane for other interesting things to happen. I can see a park there. I can see some potential pathways and playgrounds. So I speculate, right, they want to keep a very simple housing massing, right, just to build as many as they can, and then offer the ground plane as recreation grounds or all sorts of things to happen there. It is certainly of a certain generation and of a certain time, and they at that point believe this is the kind of sort of best move they can make.
The era is Soviet Union, 1970.
Yeah, so that's about that time. If we were to make it today, I would say density is not it's not an adversary to making good urban spaces. I would take more interest in what the ground plane could be instead of just trees, right? It can be more than that. We can define zones for different compartments of activities to happen, right? It can allow people who want a really open space to have that, but also if somebody wants a quiet space to just be alone, they can have that. It can allow for maybe a cafe or some sort of ground level retail. So you invite the sense of porosity in and out the building. I think those are good added elements that we can do today that's different from at least what I can see in this image.
That's what the ground looks like in most of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, you can see a playground here, absolutely. That there is some thought of returning the ground plane back to recreation use and people use. If there's one takeaway when we look at images of design, I would say I care a whole lot more about what the design is trying to do than what it looks like. Right, so there obviously is an aging process happening here, or maybe the form is out of date, but that doesn't take away whether or not a design is good or bad. I think if some of the most successful places, urban spaces, or buildings are not necessarily pretty, but they function very well for the public. That's a good question, though. Worth thinking about.
Thank you, Devish, for the question. Are there any last questions? Okay, if not, I say good night to everyone.
Great.
And thank you again for us.
Thanks, Tommy. Thanks, everyone. Take care.